So when you write about language in fiction text, there are specific things you might comment on. For example, how a character is described, how they behave. Perhaps you might write about what they say or the dialogue that's used. You could comment on setting or atmosphere and how language is used to create certain effects. Think back to an earlier session on techniques and devices. You could look for different techniques to write about, but do remember this. It's not a tick list of seeking these out. It's more important to be original with your interpretation. So here are 3 different examples of fiction text. What I want you to think about is what you could write about each one. So after each, there's an example. This is the first one. The old lady's hair was steel grey. It was knotted and tangled, and so much so that when Amelia tried to get a comb through it, it jammed. So here the writer is using adjectives like old and knotted and tangled to describe the old woman's hair. And it makes the reader think perhaps she doesn't care about her hair or isn't able to. Maybe her hair is the least of her worries. Here's a second example. Windy, wild and wet it was, and the skies spoke of more to come. So the focus here is on the atmosphere, with the triplet of alliterative adjectives allowing the reader to imagine the ferocity of the scene. It finishes with the sibilant skies spoke, and this is also an example of personification, giving the impression the sky is alive and dangerous, with a mind of its own. And the third example, as soon as the car left the driveway, Hannah was left wondering, what if he never returns? What if my father never ever comes back? She closed the door, clunk, click, and didn't stop crying all night. So here the writer begins with a third person perspective, then almost changes to the first person, but they're still writing about Hannah, not as her. The action towards the end, with the onomatopoeic verbs clunk, click, highlight how Hannah is now left alone. And as readers, we can imagine the sounds and the finality of such actions. So we've considered language and how it works, and we're going to carry on focusing on this. And as we move on, I'd like you to think about, in more detail, other techniques and devices that we can use when writing about the effects of language. Now, depending on the examination syllabus you are doing, you might be asked a question like, how does the writer use language to present ideas about? Or, how does the writer use language to describe? Or, what sort of character is, and how does the writer use language to? Now, you might be asked to refer to structure too, although this could be in a separate question. It would depend on your examination syllabus. Annotating the text you are given, remembering it may well be a cluster of lines, will be very important. Think about the sorts of things that you will be expected to refer to. I'm going to show you an extract from chapter 1 of Louisa May Alcott's novel Little Women. Now, this novel was written in the 1860s. In this section, readers are introduced to some of the main characters. Margaret, the eldest of the 4, was 16 and very pretty, being plump and fair, with large eyes, plenty of soft brown hair, a sweet mouth and white hands, of which she was rather vain. 15-year-old Jo was very tall, thin and brown, and reminded one of a colt, for she never seemed to know what to do with her long limbs, which were very much in her way. She had a decided mouth, a comical nose, and sharp grey eyes, which appeared to see everything and were by turns fierce, funny, or thoughtful. Her long, thick hair was her one beauty, but it was usually bundled into a net to be out of her way. Round shoulders had Jo, big hands and feet, a flyaway look to her clothes, and the uncomfortable appearance of a girl who was rapidly shooting up into a woman and didn't like it. Elizabeth, or Beth, as everyone called her, was a rosy, smooth-haired, bright-eyed girl of 13 with a shy manner, a timid voice, and a peaceful expression which was seldom disturbed. Her father called her Little Miss Tranquility, and the name suited her excellently, for she seemed to live in a happy world of her own, only venturing out to meet the few whom she trusted and loved. Amy, though the youngest, was a most important person, at least in her own opinion. A regular snow maiden with blue eyes and yellow hair curling on her shoulders, pale and slender, and always carrying herself like a young lady mindful of her manners. What the characters of the four sisters were, we will leave to be found out. The clock struck 6, and having swept up the hearth, Beth put a pair of slippers down to warm. Somehow, the sight of the old shoes had a good effect upon the girls, for Mother was coming, and everyone brightened to welcome her. Meg stopped lecturing and lighted the lamp. Amy got out of the easy chair without being asked, and Jo forgot how tired she was as she sat up to hold the slippers nearer to the blaze. Now, with an extract like this, you might be asked a particular question about a character. For example, based on this extract, what sort of character is Jo, and how does the writer use language to describe her? Okay, so here you might look at the physical details, such as tall, thin, long limbs, a comical nose, sharp grey eyes. Also, though, you might want to consider what the writer implies about her character. Is she practical and sensible? What about her personality? Let's look at 2 examples then, which answer the question, based on this extract, what sort of character is Jo, and how does the writer use language to describe her? The first response. Jo is shown to be tall and thin with long legs. Her face is quite unusual looking, and she has long hair. And response 2. The character of Jo is quite awkward, and like a young horse, as Alcott compares her to a colt. Even though she seemed physically quite awkward, through the adjectives long, describing her limbs, and comical for her nose, she also seems quite shrewd, with sharp grey eyes, which appears to suggest that she sees everything. This suggests that Jo is strong-willed and with a mind of her own, and the alliterative fierce and funny, which is also an interesting juxtaposition of adjectives, implies that she is unpredictable. So, which one of these 2 responses do you think is the most effective? What do you think? I'll give you some time to write down some ideas. Okay, so the first response is brief, but also it really just copies from the text. But the second response has clear evidence, uses terminology to help analyse the text, so it's probably better overall. Let's do a quick poll. Which of these is an essential skill in language-focused questions? Write about as many language features as possible. Write about 1 language feature. Write about relevant language features and analyse these. Now, hopefully, you have selected the third option. On the downloadable handout, you will see another extract from Little Women. Your task is to read it and look at the features I have highlighted for you. Then, have a go answering the question, making it, if you can, more specific to your own examination syllabus, if you need to. We're going to move on to look at similar features of non-fiction text now in the next session.